Mark Jessup never imagined a Tuesday morning shift would unravel the very definition of hope he'd spent a decade losing. The air in the county shelter was thick with its usual cocktail of disinfectant and despair, a scent he'd long stopped noticing. It was a place of endings masquerading as a place of new beginnings, and Mark, as its manager, was the weary gatekeeper. The symphony of desperate barks and lonely meows was the soundtrack to his life, a constant, shrill reminder of too many animals and not enough homes. But today, one silence cut through the noise louder than any cry. It came from the last kennel in the quarantine wing, the one reinforced with steel bars and an extra padlock. Inside, a shadow sat with unnerving stillness. That was Rex. Rex was a Belgian Malinois, a breed sculpted from pure intensity, but he was more than that. He was a former K-9 officer, handed over with a file as thick as a novel and a verbal warning that felt like a threat. "Handler aggressive," the officer had grunted, avoiding Mark's eyes. "Unpredictable. Washed out of the program. Just be careful," the words were a death sentence in the world of animal sheltering. An aggressive dog, especially one with a bite history involving an officer, had almost no chance. He was a ghost already, haunting a 6-by-8-foot concrete box, waiting for a clock to run out. Mark had seen it 100 times. He hated it, but he was a pragmatist. His job was to manage risk, to protect his staff and the public. Rex was the embodiment of risk. For 3 weeks, Rex had done nothing to challenge the diagnosis. He never barked. He never wagged his tail. He simply stood, or sat, with the rigid posture of a soldier on guard duty, his amber eyes fixed on some point beyond the walls of his confinement. When anyone approached, a low, guttural growl would rumble in his chest, a vibration you felt in your bones before you heard it. It wasn't the frantic, fearful growl of a scared stray, it was a controlled, menacing promise. He moved with a chilling economy, pacing 3 steps one way, 3 steps the other, his paws silent on the concrete. He was a coiled spring, a storm cloud waiting to break. The staff, seasoned veterans of difficult animals, gave his kennel a wide berth. They slid his food and water bowl in with a long pole, never breaking the invisible perimeter of danger he projected. Mark had already started the paperwork. He'd given Rex a month, longer than policy dictated, but it was a hollow gesture. He knew how this story ended. But something about the dog's behavior felt off, a discordant note in the familiar song of aggression. Mark had seen dangerous dogs. They were erratic, explosive, their rage a chaotic spray. Rex was different. His intensity was focused, his energy directed. It was as if he wasn't trying to keep people out, but was waiting for someone to arrive. Mark would watch him on the security monitor at night, a silent, monochrome figure in the grey light. The dog would stand for hours, staring at the kennel door, not with aggression, but with a kind of profound, heartbreaking patience. It was a vigil. But for what? Mark dismissed the thought as sentimentality, a luxury he couldn't afford. The file said he was aggressive. The growl confirmed it. The facts were the facts. Then came the family. Mark saw them from his office window, pulling into the parking lot in a specially equipped van. A man and a woman got out, their movements practiced and careful as they operated the ramp. Then, the little girl appeared, secured in a wheelchair that looked more like a command center, with padded supports, a small digital screen, and a network of subtle wiring. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. Her name, he would soon learn, was Lily. Her parents, Tom and Sarah, wore the gentle exhaustion of full-time caregivers, their smiles soft, but their eyes constantly scanning, monitoring, protecting. They'd called ahead, asking about a companion animal, something calm and quiet, a gentle soul to sit with their daughter. A cat, perhaps. Or a senior lap dog. Mark had a few in mind. He would steer them far away from the main kennel, far away from the cacophony, and especially far away from the quarantine wing. He would keep them safe. He would keep Lily safe. That was his job. He had no idea that in his effort to protect her, he was about to lead her directly to the one thing in the world she truly needed, and the one thing he believed to be the greatest danger in his shelter. What he was about to witness would not just stun him, it would shatter his understanding of the line between monster and miracle. This was no ordinary adoption visit. This was an appointment with destiny, set in a place where hope had all but died. Mark led the family through the quieter, cattery section first. The air was warmer here, filled with the gentle hum of purrs and the soft tinkling of bells on collars. Lily watched the cats with wide, curious eyes. Her head was supported by a brace, and her movements were minimal, but her gaze was alive, taking in the lazy stretches and playful swats. Sarah, her mother, knelt beside the wheelchair, pointing. "Look, sweetie. See the orange one? He looks like a little tiger." Lily offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, her fingers twitching slightly on the joystick that controlled her chair. Mark tried to gauge her reaction. He'd learned over the years that the quietest visitors were often the most profound observers. They didn't coo or tap on the glass, they connected on a different frequency. Tom, her father, stood back, a silent guardian, his hand resting on the back of the wheelchair, a constant, reassuring presence. They were a self-contained unit, a fortress of love built around their fragile daughter. Mark suggested a few of the older, more placid cats, and even a bonded pair of rabbits, but nothing seemed to spark a genuine connection. There was a polite interest, but not the magic he looked for. "Maybe a dog?" Sarah asked softly, her eyes meeting Mark's. "Just a small one. Something very, very calm." Mark's stomach tightened. The dog wing was the opposite of calm. It was a barrage of noise and frantic energy that could overwhelm even the most robust visitor. "It's quite loud back there," he warned gently. "It can be a lot." Tom nodded. "We can handle loud. Lily's used to it, in her own way. We just want to see," against his better judgment, Mark agreed. He formulated a plan. He'd take them down the A block, where the smaller breeds were housed, and then turn back. The C block, the quarantine wing where Rex was kept, was at the far end of the building. They wouldn't even have to walk past it. The moment they pushed through the double doors, the sound hit them like a physical force. 100 dogs, united in a chorus of hope and anxiety, threw themselves against their kennel doors. It was a tidal wave of sound. Mark watched Lily, expecting her to flinch or retreat into herself. Instead, she seemed to lean forward slightly, her eyes scanning the rows of jumping, barking animals. Her parents remained close, their expressions unreadable but tense. Mark pointed out a gentle-eyed beagle named Sam, and a fluffy poodle mix named Daisy. He kept his voice loud and cheerful, trying to project a sense of order over the chaos. But the family's attention was drifting. Their path had inadvertently taken them to the main corridor that led, eventually, to the C block. Mark tried to redirect them, suggesting they meet one of the small dogs in a quiet visiting room, but Tom was already moving forward. "What's down that way?" he asked, his voice casual. "That's mostly intake and quarantine," Mark said quickly, stepping slightly to block the path. "Staff only. Nothing to see back there." Really, it was a lie, and he knew it. But the image of this delicate child anywhere near Rex's kennel sent a tremor of fear through him. But then, something strange happened. The barking, which had been a constant, deafening roar, suddenly faltered. A pocket of silence opened up at the far end of the hall. One by one, the dogs in the kennels closest to the C block fell quiet. The silence spread like a ripple, the frantic energy of the room draining away, replaced by an unnerving stillness. The only sound was the hum of the ventilation, and the soft whir of Lily's wheelchair, as Tom pushed it forward, drawn by the sudden quiet. Mark's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew who was at the center of that silence. It was Rex. He was the alpha of this desperate pack, and his silence commanded theirs. They had reached the C block. And there, in the last kennel, was the dog. Rex wasn't growling. He wasn't pacing. He was standing perfectly still, his powerful body taut, his head lowered slightly. Every muscle was locked. And he was staring. Not at Mark, not at the parents, but directly, unequivocally, at the little girl in the wheelchair. His amber eyes, which Mark had only ever seen filled with cold menace, now held an expression of such raw, piercing intensity that it stole the breath from Mark's lungs. It wasn't aggression. It was recognition. A low sound started deep in Rex's chest. It wasn't the threatening growl from before. It was a hum, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to make the air shimmer. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, pressing his broad head against the steel bars of the kennel door, his gaze never leaving Lily. Mark's training screamed at him to get the family out of there. "Okay, that's enough," he said, his voice tight. "We should go back now." He's not friendly, he put a hand on Tom's shoulder, trying to gently turn him around. But Tom was frozen, watching the interaction. And Lily? Lily was not afraid. While her parents stood rigid with apprehension, Lily did something that defied all logic. She moved her hand, the one that rested on her joystick, and slowly, with visible effort, extended her arm. Her small, pale fingers uncurled, reaching toward the formidable creature just a few feet away. "Lily, no," Sarah whispered, her voice sharp with panic, pulling the wheelchair back a few inches. The moment she pulled back, Rex's composure broke. He let out a whine. It was a sound so filled with longing and desperation that it sliced through the tense silence. It was the cry of a creature seeing its entire world move away from it. He pawed at the kennel door, not with anger, but with a kind of rhythmic urgency. Thump! 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 The sound was a frantic heartbeat. His eyes, still locked on Lily, were wide and pleading. He was trying to say something. Not to Mark, not to her parents, but directly to her. And in that moment, Mark knew, with a certainty that defied every line in Rex's file, that he had been wrong. Horrifically, dangerously wrong. This wasn't an aggressive dog. This was something else entirely. And whatever it was, it had to do with the silent, fragile girl in the wheelchair. The mystery of Rex had just begun, and Mark felt a terrifying, compelling need to solve it, no matter the risk. In the days that followed, the shelter returned to its noisy equilibrium, but for Mark, the silence from Rex's kennel was all he could hear. The dog had changed. After the family's visit, his menacing posture had dissolved, replaced by a profound and sorrowful stillness. He no longer paced. He no longer growled at the staff. He simply stood at the front of his kennel, his body oriented toward the main doors, his gaze fixed on the spot where the family's van had disappeared. He had stopped eating. The bowls of food, once slid in with a cautious pole, now sat untouched, a testament to a hunger that had nothing to do with sustenance. It was a hunger for connection, a silent, desperate plea. The other staff members noticed the change, attributing it to depression, a common ailment in long-term residents. "He's giving up," one of the younger volunteers said, her voice laced with pity. But Mark knew it wasn't resignation. It was a vigil. Rex was waiting. Mark found himself consumed by the enigma of the former K9. He would spend hours after the shelter had closed for the night, sitting in his office, watching the grainy security footage of Rex's kennel. He saw the dog stand for 6, 7, 8 hours at a time, a living statue carved from grief. He saw him lay his head on his paws, letting out a low, mournful sigh that fogged the small patch of concrete in front of him. This wasn't the behavior of a vicious, unpredictable animal. This was the behavior of a creature who had found something essential and had it torn away. The label "handler aggressive" echoed in his mind, a jarring, discordant piece of information that no longer fit the puzzle. Aggressive toward whom? Why? He had shown no aggression toward Lily, only a desperate, focused attention. Driven by a need he couldn't quite name, Mark started digging. He pulled Rex's intake file again, poring over the scant details. K-9 unit dropout. Reason, unsuitability for field work. Handler, Officer Miller. It was clinical, detached, and utterly unhelpful. His first calls to the police department were met with bureaucratic brick walls. The file is sealed, a gruff records clerk told him. The dog is your property now. It's a liability issue. The more they stonewalled, the more convinced Mark became that they were hiding something. It wasn't just about a dog failing a training program. It was something more. He tried tracking down Officer Miller directly, but learned he was on extended personal leave. Another dead end. The frustration mounted, coiling in his chest. Rex was fading. The vet had already warned Mark that if he didn't start eating soon, they would have to consider intravenous fluids, a last-ditch effort that rarely ended well for a dog so stressed. Time was running out. Then, the phone rang. It was Sarah, Lily's mother. Her voice was hesitant, a mixture of anxiety and curiosity. I know this is a strange request, she began, but Lily won't stop asking about him. Mark's breath caught. Asking, he repeated, confused, as he remembered the girl was mostly nonverbal. She has a communication device, Sarah explained. It's a tablet with symbols and a keyboard. She keeps spelling DOG, and pointing to a picture of a German shepherd we found online. And she keeps saying, "Sad the sad dog." Sarah paused, and Mark could hear the conflict in her voice. We were all so frightened. My husband, he thinks the dog is dangerous. But Lily wasn't scared. I've never seen her react to anything like that before. She's usually so passive. Mark listened, his own theory solidifying with every word she spoke. He's been different since you left, he confessed, his voice low. He hasn't eaten. He just waits. Another pause on the line. He could almost hear the gears turning in Sarah's mind, a mother's intuition warring with a parent's protective instinct. I was wondering, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper, if we could possibly see him again. Just for a minute. From a distance. Maybe if she sees he's okay, she can let it go. Mark's heart leaped. It was a risk. A huge risk. If something went wrong, the consequences would be catastrophic for the shelter, for the family, and for Rex. But if he did nothing, Rex would die of a broken heart in a concrete cell. Yes, Mark said, the word leaving his lips before he had time to second-guess it. Yes. Come tomorrow. I'll arrange it. He spent the rest of the day, and most of the night planning the encounter. He would use the large, fenced-in exercise yard, a wide-open space where he could maintain distance and control. He would keep Rex on a heavy-duty, double-clipped leash. He would have another senior staff member, a former vet tech named Maria, on standby with a catch pole, a grim necessity that made him feel sick to his stomach. He was creating a scenario that looked, for all intents and purposes, like he was handling a known threat. Yet, in his gut, he felt he was orchestrating a reunion. He was placing a fragile, silent child in the path of a powerful, misunderstood animal, and he was betting everything, his career, his conscience, the girl's safety, on a gut feeling, on the memory of a desperate whine and a pair of pleading amber eyes. The next day would either be a disaster of his own making or the moment the truth was finally revealed. The morning arrived heavy and grey, the sky a blanket of bruised clouds that mirrored the anxiety in Mark's chest. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of rain. He watched from his office as the familiar white van pulled into the lot. Sarah and Tom emerged, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and profound apprehension. They gently wheeled Lily down the ramp, her small form bundled in a pink blanket. Mark met them at the entrance, his own expression grimly professional, betraying none of the turmoil raging within him. We'll use the main yard, he explained, his voice calm and steady. You can stay near the gate. I'll bring him out. We keep a safe distance at all times. If he shows any sign of stress or aggression, the visit is over immediately. Understood. Tom nodded curtly, his hand gripping the back of Lily's wheelchair like an anchor. Sarah simply whispered, "Thank you." Mark walked back to the C block, his boots echoing in the now silent kennel. Maria was already there, holding the catch pole. Her face was pale. "Are you sure about this, Mark?" she asked, her voice low. "I'm not," he admitted honestly. "But I'm less sure about letting him die in here." He approached Rex's kennel. The dog was already on his feet, his body trembling, his ears perked. He knew. Somehow, he knew. He wasn't looking at Mark, his head was cocked toward the front of the shelter, his nose twitching, deciphering the scents on the air. For the first time, as Mark unlatched the heavy door, Rex did not growl. He whined softly, a low, eager sound, and pushed his head into Mark's hand. The touch was electric, a silent communication of trust that felt momentous. He clipped the thick leash to Rex's collar, the click of the metal echoing in the quiet hall. As they walked toward the yard, Rex pulled, not with the frantic, lunging energy of an unsocialized dog, but with the focused, determined pull of a sled dog with a destination. His entire being was a compass needle pointing in one direction. The moment the door to the yard opened, he saw her. Lily was about 50 feet away, a small, still figure near the fence line. Rex stopped dead. His body went rigid, his tail gave a single, tentative thump against Mark's leg, and he let out that same low, resonant hum from the first visit. He was fixated, his world shrinking to the small girl in the pink blanket. "Okay, just hold him there," Tom called out, his voice tight with tension. But Rex had other ideas. With a strength that nearly pulled Mark off his feet, he began to walk forward, slowly, deliberately, closing the distance. Mark dug his heels into the damp grass, his arms straining against the dog's immense power. "Rex, heel," he commanded, his voice sharp. The dog ignored him completely. His training, his past, his handler, none of it mattered. Only the girl mattered. He walked directly to Lily's wheelchair and stopped. The yard fell into a profound silence, broken only by the distant rumble of traffic and Sarah's sharp intake of breath. Mark held the leash so tight his knuckles were white, ready to haul the dog back at the slightest hint of trouble. But there was no trouble. Rex lowered his great head, and, with infinite gentleness, rested it on Lily's lap, right over the blanket. He let out a long, shuddering sigh, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief, as if he had just completed a journey across a vast desert and finally found his oasis. And then, the miracle. Lily, whose face was often a mask of placid neutrality, broke into a smile. It was not a small, fleeting twitch of the lips. It was a radiant, brilliant, soul-shaking smile that lit up her entire being. With painstaking effort, she lifted her hand and laid it on top of Rex's head, her small fingers tangling in his thick fur. The scene was one of impossible peace, the aggressive dog and the fragile child, united in a moment of perfect, silent understanding. For a full minute, they stayed like that. Mark felt the tension in his arms begin to ease. He saw Sarah's shoulders relax, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. Even Tom's rigid posture softened. But then, Rex's behavior shifted. He lifted his head, a look of concern replacing his serene expression. He nudged Lily's side with his nose, gently at first, then more insistently. He let out a short, high-pitched whine and looked from Lily to Sarah, then to Mark, his eyes wide and frantic. He was trying to communicate something, his peaceful demeanor replaced by an urgent anxiety. He nudged her again, harder this time, pushing against her torso. "Hey! He's getting rough!" Tom shouted, taking a step forward. "Mark, get him back!" "Wait!" Mark yelled, the word torn from his throat. He saw it then, the pattern. The alert stare. The nudging. The frantic look toward the caregivers. This wasn't aggression. This was a signal. He'd seen training videos of medical alert dogs. This was an alert. Just as the thought solidified in his mind, a shrill, frantic beeping erupted from the monitor attached to Lily's wheelchair. Her face, which had been bright with her smile, suddenly went slack and pale. Her eyes rolled back slightly, and her breathing became rapid and shallow. "Oh God, it's an episode!" Sarah cried, fumbling in a bag attached to the chair. "Tom, the medication, quick!" The scene exploded into controlled chaos. Sarah and Tom worked with practiced efficiency, administering an emergency injection, their faces masks of terror. And through it all, Rex did not back away. He stood guard, whining softly, his body a shield between Lily and the world. He began to lick her hand, a constant, rhythmic motion, as if trying to tether her to consciousness. He had known. Before the parents, before the sophisticated medical device, the dog had known. The truth hit Mark with the force of a physical blow. Rex wasn't just a dog. He was a guardian. And he hadn't been waiting for just anyone. He had been waiting for her. The shrill wail of an ambulance siren grew closer, a sound that Mark had requested as a worst-case scenario precaution. The paramedics, arriving to a scene already de-escalating, were briefed by a breathless Sarah. Lily's color was returning, her breathing steadying. The monitor's beeping slowed to a calm, rhythmic pulse. One of the paramedics, a tall man with kind eyes, knelt beside the wheelchair, checking Lily's vitals. His gaze fell upon Rex, who was still faithfully licking Lily's hand, his body pressed against her leg. "What happened?" the paramedic asked. "He warned us," Sarah said, her voice trembling with awe. "The dog, he knew she was going to have a seizure before her monitor even went off. He was trying to tell us." The paramedic looked from the sophisticated electronic device to the steadfast animal. He shook his head slowly. "I've been doing this for 15 years, he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "I've heard stories, but I've never seen it. That dog knew before the machine did." Mark stood frozen, the heavy leash hanging limp in his hand. The entire narrative he had built around Rex, the aggression, the unpredictability, the danger, crumbled into dust. Every piece of the puzzle clicked into place with dizzying clarity. The intense stare, the rhythmic pawing, the insistent nudging, the mournful vigil, it was all part of a language he hadn't known how to interpret. A language of profound, instinctual devotion. He finally understood. Rex hadn't washed out because he was aggressive. He had failed because he was incapable of generalizing his gift. He was a creature of singular, absolute loyalty. He needed one person to protect, one soul to anchor him. While the chaos subsided, Mark pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking as he dialed. He had managed to get Officer Miller's personal number from a sympathetic dispatcher earlier that week, a last resort he hadn't planned to use. This time, a man's tired voice answered. "Miller," the voice said, flat and weary. "This is Mark Jessup from the county shelter," Mark began, his own voice unsteady. "I have your K9, Rex." There was a long silence on the other end, heavy with unspoken history. "Look, I'm on leave," Miller finally said. "I signed the papers. He's not my dog anymore. He almost saved a little girl's life today," Mark said, cutting him off. He detected a seizure before her medical equipment did. He wasn't being aggressive. He was alerting another, longer silence. Mark could hear a faint, choked sound, like a suppressed sob. "He did that with my son," Miller confessed, his voice cracking, the dam of professionalism finally breaking. "My boy has epilepsy. We thought Rex could be his service dog. He was brilliant. But his bond, it was too strong. He wouldn't let anyone else near my son. Not doctors, not even my wife. He saw everyone as a threat. The department classified it as handler aggression, said he was a liability. Taking him away, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. I thought his gift was a curse. I thought we'd condemned him. Mark closed his eyes, the weight of the confession settling over him. Rex wasn't a failure. His training hadn't failed. His heart had simply worked too well. He had been born to do one job, for one person, and the system had tried to make him something he wasn't. He hadn't been pining for Officer Miller's son. He had been pining for his purpose. And in a crowded, chaotic shelter, his finely tuned senses had scanned every person who walked by until, against all odds, he found her. A little girl with a silent illness. A girl who needed a guardian as devoted and absolute as he was. There was no longer any question of what would happen next. There was no paperwork, no protocol, no liability waiver that could stand in the way of a connection this profound. As the paramedics packed up, declaring Lily stable and safe, Tom approached Mark. His face was stripped of its earlier fear, replaced by a look of sheer, humbled wonder. He looked at Rex, who had once again rested his head on Lily's lap, a furry, breathing sentinel. That dog, Tom started, his voice thick with emotion. He's not leaving her side, is he? Mark shook his head, a slow smile finally spreading across his face. No, he said softly. I don't think he is. I think he's finally home. Months melted away, turning the damp chill of that fateful day into the warm, golden light of late summer. The frantic noise of the shelter remained Mark's daily reality, but it sounded different now. It felt less like a chorus of despair, and more like a symphony of possibilities, each bark and meow a story waiting for its right chapter. The C block still housed difficult cases, but Mark looked at them with new eyes, searching for the hidden language beneath the growls and fear. Rex's empty kennel was a shrine. The staff kept it clean, and sometimes Mark would stand before it, remembering the silent, stoic dog who had taught him to listen with his heart. What began as another sad case, another piece of paperwork for a life deemed disposable, had become a defining moment of redemption, not just for the dog, but for him. One afternoon, an email arrived from Sarah. The subject line was simple: an update from Lily's guardian. Attached was a video. Mark clicked play, and his sterile office filled with the sound of birdsong and a child's pure, uninhibited laughter. The video showed a vibrant green lawn, with Lily in her wheelchair, a specially adapted ball launcher strapped to the armrest. With a joyful press of a button, she sent a tennis ball flying across the yard. A flash of sable fur and joyous energy bounded after it. It was Rex. He moved with the fluid grace of an athlete, his body alive with happiness. But he wasn't just playing. After each retrieve, he would trot back and drop the ball not into the launcher, but gently beside Lily's chair, nudging her hand with his nose and looking up at her face, checking in. Always checking in. The game was secondary to his real job. The video ended with Lily's laughter fading as Rex, mission accomplished, curled up at the base of her wheelchair, resting his chin on her footrest, his amber eyes watching over her with that same unwavering, absolute devotion. Mark leaned back in his chair, the image of the dog and the girl burning brightly in his mind. The aggressive police dog, the paralyzed little girl, they were labels, clinical and cold, words that described limitations. But what he had witnessed was a story that transcended those labels. It was about two souls, both trapped in bodies that had been misunderstood and underestimated by the world, who had recognized each other instantly. They spoke the same silent language of instinct, loyalty, and unconditional love. Rex wasn't just a pet, he was Lily's other half, her protector, her confidant, her living, breathing miracle. And Lily, in her own quiet way, had been his. She had been the one to see past the warnings and the steel bars, to recognize the sad, waiting heart inside. They had rescued each other. Mark closed his laptop, a profound sense of peace settling over him. He thought about all the cages in the world, not just the ones made of metal, but the ones we build from fear, prejudice, and misunderstanding. He realized that the most heroic acts often come from the most unlikely heroes, and that true connection has the power to rewrite any story. What we perceive as aggression can sometimes be a desperate form of protection. What we see as weakness can hide an unbreakable strength. We just have to be brave enough to look closer, to listen to the silence between the noise, and to trust in the connections that defy explanation. For every soul that feels lost, misunderstood, or labeled, there is a counterpart waiting, a connection that can bring them home. Sometimes, all it takes is one person, or one dog, to see you for who you truly are. If this story touched your heart, please share it, so that more people can be reminded to look past the surface and find the hero waiting within. Subscribe for more journeys of hope, because every life is a story worth telling.